How can I start it? Okay, perfect. So we are live recording. I am here in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, even though our headquarters is in Costa Rica, where a lot of you are coming in from. And I'm seeing now about 60 participants, which is a fantastic number. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in this topic. So with no further ado, let me launch in, and I'm going to share my screen. And as soon as you see it, maybe you can give me a quick thumbs up to let me know that you're seeing it, and I'll get started. So are you seeing my screen? Perfect. So welcome to this webinar on well-being in virtual teams, from isolation to connectedness. And this is being offered by the UP Center for Executive Education. Quick thing, we're headquartered in Costa Rica, but really our networks are around the world. I myself am based in Florida, and this topic is so close to my heart. I've been living in Florida for the last 9 years, working virtually. So actually, I've dealt with all the stages of from going to being in a highly connected team in Costa Rica to feeling lonely and isolated when I moved here. And so actually at these times, ironically, my whole family is home too. So I'm less lonely and isolated than usual, but I have experienced this. And so I feel like somewhat of an expert in this topic. And so, I wanted to just kind of launch with the question, why is well-being so important to our work? Yeah? You wouldn't be on this if you didn't think it was, because the title of the webinar is Achieving Well-being. So I would like to share something that if you surveyed leaders of organizations, they would say, 3 things are really important for most organizations. How our finances are doing, and most leaders know that, how our customers are doing. And then the last thing is how our people are doing, right? And so we're going to focus on the well-being aspect. It's the one that is hardest sometimes to manage. Now I'm going to do something. I'm just going to mute everyone. There's a little background noise. So I'm just going to mute all. And so, but I've allowed participants to unmute themselves. So if you at some point have something that you want to say, please unmute yourself and speak. Is that all right? So back to the 3 fundamental indicators for any organization, and we're going to focus in on the well-being piece. So there is no surprise here. This is a cover issue of Harvard Business Review. I think it was 2010, so pretty much a decade ago, that for many reasons, employee well-being, employee happiness drives profits. Happy employees are more engaged, they are more productive, they're sick less, they're more creative, they collaborate better, a slew of reasons. Now, the one tricky thing about this is that what is our understanding of happiness? It's a complex concept. So the first part of the webinar, what I want to do is kind of unpack happiness, and then give you a chance to break into small groups and talk a little bit about well-being in your teams. And then we'll go on to another concept called psychological safety. So there is a science behind understanding happiness. It's called positive psychology. I have a picture of Martin Seligman, who's often credited to be the father of positive psychology, and a book recommendation. He wrote Flourish, a visionary new understanding of happiness and well-being. I do not receive any royalties for his book sold, but I definitely feel it's a powerful understanding of well-being in all different contexts. So, if I had to kind of take Seligman's 3 decades of research. By the way, he's been working with a team of other psychologists, positive psychologists around the world, and put our understanding of what is well-being on one slide. It's these 5 things. It spells the acronym PERMA. So what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is I'm going to go through every pillar of well-being and explain that to you before we have a chance to kind of discuss it in our groups, okay? So the P of PERMA stands for positive emotions. And really, these are top 10 positive emotions. This research was by Barbara Fredrickson. She talks about gratitude, joy, love, awe, inspiration, amusement, pride, hope, interest, and serenity, right? And the question that I want you to start reflecting on is how do we make sure to experience some of these when working virtually, right? Some of these emotions would come up naturally at the workplace. You share a joke with a colleague and that's amusement. You show something that you've written or done, or a sale that's happened, or a letter that you've drafted and you're proud of that. So there's a lot, we spend a lot of our waking hours usually at the workplace. These emotions play out. Now that we're working virtually in isolation, how do we make sure to experience these extremely important positive emotions? Okay. So the next pillar of well-being is the E. And this is different from all the other pillars. The E stands for engagement, right? And engagement is as simple as knowing your top strengths and being able to use them. Now, there are a couple of things I want to say here. A lot of you are probably have worked your way into a place where you are using your top strengths at work, right? Some of you may not. And I think that this webinar is going to be valuable for you, whether or not these are certainly times of change and turbulent times, but at all times, if you're aware of your top strengths and able to use them at work, that is a pillar of well-being. Now, in this picture, you know, somebody is explaining something and maybe they are graphing out or collaborating. And these are things that are not naturally happening anymore. So again, the question I want you to reflect on, are you aware of your top strengths and are you still able to use them virtually? If not, what can you do? So confession here, I love being in a room with people. I do a lot of facilitation. So, you know, this webinar is a way for me to continue to use some of my strengths, right? So think about ways that you can, given the circumstances, continue to use your top strengths and stay engaged. Now, the R of PERMA stands for positive relationships. And I would say this is the biggest, perhaps of all the 5 pillars of our understanding of happiness or well-being. This is the real challenge during this pandemic, where most of us are in lockdown mode. You know, we spend, I think the statistic is, and I'm forgetting the number of hours, if it's 80,000 hours, but basically most of our waking hours during the week are spent at work. And so, and we have, workplaces are environments where we can experience a lot of positive relationships. So this is one that I'm really going to, when we go into breakout groups, ask you to think about, what are you doing to maintain these relationships? Now, the last 2 pillars of well-being, the M stands for meaning. And you know, when we are isolated from our workplace, we're not interacting with customers in the same way, or our clients. And again, I know you represent a variety of fields, but somehow we can disconnect from the why we're doing what we're doing. And so, you know, are people in your organization during these times being reminded of the why of their work and how it's really impacting people? And then lastly, the A of PERMA stands for achievement. And achievement, we all want to have a sense that we're getting better at the things that matter to us. And our workplaces and our work environment provides us that ability. You know, when we serve let's say if I teach a workshop and I see people at the end come up and say, oh, that was great, or I can see that, you know, the aha moments happening, that makes me feel a sense of achievement. So again, all of you come from different backgrounds, but our workplace is for most people is a place where they feel that sense of achievement. And so now that we are working remotely from home in virtual settings, it's really important for us to have some kind of scoreboard where we get a sense that our work is actually having an impact, right? And I love this quote at the bottom. It says, people play differently when you keep score. So somehow when you know that, you know, even though you never left your house, that your work mattered and that it made a difference. What's the scoreboard that your team has? And that changes the level of motivation. So those are the 5 elements of well-being coming to us from the field of positive psychology and translated into the workplace and how this plays out and why these are particularly challenging in times when we've suddenly had to abandon the place that we usually go into work. So what I want to just emphasize is that it's critical to integrate these pillars of happiness into your virtual teams, into your virtual settings. By the way, I realize in this webinar, some of you are leaders of teams, some of you are team members, and some of you might just be, you know, I would call them part of the gig economy, where you work for yourself. You used to go out and do different things, have different consulting contracts, but now you're not interacting in the same way. You're working from home. So this framework applies to all of you, and it's just critical that you continue to integrate the pillars of happiness into your virtual setting. So let me just pause here and see if there are any questions. And I think, let me see. The best way probably to ask a question would be to type it into the text box or get off mute and state it. Okay, you know what I'm going to do is I think given the number of people on the webinar, what might be even more effective, since nobody jumped onto that opportunity to ask a question, is let's try to break out into small groups and then have a discussion. And this is the discussion I'm going to suggest that you have. Yes.
Could you just speak about flow a little bit? I think that's an important concept under engagement.
Yeah, thanks, Miguel. So, you know, engagement, so that's the E of PERMA, is this idea of knowing your strengths and being able to use them. And one of the, you know, it's a Hungarian positive psychologist, Csikszentmihalyi, he came up with this term called flow. When you're using your strengths, you often feel that, you know, time stands still. You look at your watch and you think 20 minutes have gone by, but really 2 hours have gone by. Another kind of indicator that you're using your strengths is that you feel strong. It feels you're in kind of this effortless control. It doesn't feel hard because you're using your strengths. To somebody else, it might feel hard. So those are some kind of indicators that you're in flow, and it often requires you to both be using your strengths, but also be doing something that's challenging. If you're using your strengths, but the task at hand is super easy or routine or monotonous, then you don't enter that state of high engagement or flow. Miguel, do you want to add something to that? Because I know that you're also very familiar with that concept.
No, I mean, I think that was very good. It's just that in flow, the idea, flow is something that you experience later. You realize that you were in flow, because I mean, time just goes by. You're not even aware of it. It happens like when great musicians are playing, or when you're involved in something that you really enjoy doing.
Thank you. Thanks, Miguel. So, you know what, maybe this is my cue for saying that I will follow up and send you the slides, but I'll add a 1 page at the end, or 1 slide at the end, where I'll list out some resources for you to go further in any of these topics. Maybe I'll do a top 10 kind of resources on well-being and virtual work things. So let me now just restate the questions. I'm going to have you in breakout rooms, and what you're going to discuss with the approximately 6 people in your room is what strategies have been most helpful in staying connected to your team. Okay, so what strategies have been most helpful in staying connected to your team? The way this is going to work is there are 75 people now, or 72 people on this webinar. I'm going to create a breakout room with, there are going to be 12 rooms. So it's going to be an average of 6 people per room. You'll just get a message on your screen saying, join the breakout room. Please hit yes. You'll find yourself then with 5 or 6 people. Unmute yourself and have a 5-minute discussion where you're sharing strategies that have been most useful in helping staying connected to your team, thinking about this PERMA framework for well-being. Is that clear? Okay, great, let's do it. So I've just opened the rooms, and you can just hit join, and you'll find yourself in a breakout room. Okay, great. I see people coming back out of their their breakout rooms. Again, if you want to see people in the gallery mode, you can, I'll give it a few more seconds. But let me do a quick visual check-in. How did that go for you? So thumbs up. Excellent. Okay, perfect. Again, I'll admit I had run many of these kinds of sessions before, but till a week ago, I didn't know that you could do breakout rooms in Zoom. But part of the motivation to learn about Zoom is because we're spending much more time interacting virtually. So before I didn't know how to do this. Excellent. So what I'm going to do now is I'll go back to sharing my screen and hopefully able to see that again. And so, you know, one thing I want to just share, this is a quote from Sean Aker, author of The Happiness Advantage. He has a great TED Talk about happiness at work. And he says the greatest predictor of success and happiness at work is the quality of your relationships and social support. So super important to find other ways to maintain that, even though you're not seeing people in the same way, you're not in the same physical space as them. And hopefully just the ability to see how in these, you can have these breakout rooms. There are definitely ways that you can recreate a lot of the essence of what relationships are about, right? About being vulnerable, about sharing, about being connected. So the next concept that I wanted to share with you that I think is critical is this concept of psychological safety. Some of you may already know about it. It actually started a few years ago with a question about Google. Google, as they've grown from a startup to a giant, they've maintained their desire and ability to work in small entrepreneurial teams. And they were trying to figure out, you know, some teams do better than others. And they were trying to tease out what are the factors that make certain teams very successful. They had different hypotheses. Maybe it's a team of people who know each other from the past, or people who are all superstars. So they had a team of researchers do a multi-year study, and they came up with this, it's called Project Aristotle, where they published their research. But when they connected with this concept of psychological safety, they were able to answer that question. Teams that had fostered the conditions for psychological safety outperformed other teams at Google. And it's not only true at Google, it's true about teams in general. So I want to first explain to you what the concept of psychological safety basically means. It describes a team climate characterized by interpersonal trust and mutual respect, in which people are comfortable being themselves. In psychologically safe teams, team members feel accepted and respected. Okay, so that's the essence of it. The research on psychological safety was done by Dr. Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School. So let me just explain to you a few characteristics of when you don't have psychological safety. None of us want to look ignorant, so people don't ask questions. None of us want to look incompetent, so nobody admits weaknesses or mistakes. Nobody wants to look intrusive, so people don't offer ideas. And nobody wants to appear to be negative, so we don't critique the status quo, right? Because people do not feel safe. And therefore, once you've created psychological safety, once you've created as a leader or even as a team member, influence the conditions so people can be themselves, can take risks, can say what's in their mind, can be vulnerable, can question, then you might ask, but what about accountability? What if I've created this very, very safe team where, you know, in my case, for example, my kids are working from home because schools are shut. What if I'm feeling so safe that I say, oh, I can't get any work done? So the other piece of any team is the A of PERMA, right? Getting things done, the accomplishment. And in this case, psychological safety has to be balanced with accountability. And the whole idea of when you establish these psychologically safe teams, there's a high level of trust. So people are then able to hold themselves and others accountable to what they say they can do. So it's a matter of finding the balance between psychological safety and accountability. And I think this 2x2 matrix really does a a good job of kind of explaining those two dimensions. So on the on one axis, you'll see this concept of psychological safety, right? And so when you have created high psychological safety, then the other piece of it is the accountability. And if you're just feeling psychologically safe but have low accountability, then you get into a comfort zone, and your team is not actually accomplishing much. But the opposite is often true, and many of you might be finding yourself in this anxiety zone where you're still accountable for all the work that you used to be, but now you don't have the tools and you don't have the resources, but you're not feeling the psychological safety to actually share that or ask for the support you need, right? So I'm going to just see, let me just do a stop share and see, are you connecting with this concept? Is the idea of high functioning teams need high psychological safety and also need high levels of accountability. That's what allows us to actually feel that pillar of accomplishment. Nobody wants to sit around at home getting distracted every 5 minutes and then saying, oh, I didn't get anything done, but you weren't even a present husband or parent, or you got lonely and you just, I go to the fridge a lot. So we don't want that. So we want to create the conditions where we can create psychological safety while creating accountability. That's the concept. And I want to first see if there are any questions about the concept and why it's particularly important in these times of disruption before I ask you to kind of, again, break you out into groups and talk in your small group, share what are things that you're doing to kind of further psychological safety. So you might well, let's talk about the small groups later. Firstly, are there any questions about the concept of psychological safety? So here, I'm going to give it a 3, 2, 1 countdown. Questions on psychological safety? Okay, so if not, yes, go ahead.
In the chat, there is one.
Oh, thanks, Esme. These concepts you mentioned, people need time to develop them, include them in their everyday life. Yeah, great question. I think the concept of psychological safety and the need for psychological safety, even in the best of times, even in a high performing company like Google, is an important one to focus on, right? Couple of things that people have found, that in psychologically safe teams, when you observe people interacting, there's something called, they call it ostentatious listening. It's basically when someone's talking, the other members of the team are actually listening and giving them due respect. It's not like just because the boss is talking that everyone's listening. It's people feel heard and respected in psychologically safe teams. And the second thing they noticed is when you observe how much people talked in these teams, it's fairly distributed. So those are things, some characteristics you can think of in helping create them. So they're important at the best of times. They're certainly important when things have been disrupted. Another question is coming up. How can team members raise this issue in a non-threatening way so that leaders who are not aware of the reasons that's the question I'd love for you to discuss in your groups, because some of us are in a position, we are team leaders, and so if you are a team leader, then you can obviously have more influence on changing the conditions. But if you're a team member, I would say that you still have a lot of influence in the team. And this is where it goes into a little bit of the detail of who's on your team, how long you've been there, who do you know well. But there's certainly levers. At the University for Peace, we have courses on positive leadership, and we say anyone who has influence is a leader. So you may be not a positional leader on your team, but you have influence on other team members and the leaders. So that's a great question for you to think about. I'm going to continue to encourage people to put on their videos and see each other if that's something that you're comfortable doing, even if you're having a bad hair day like me. No, just obviously, no, just feel free. It's very informal and relaxed, but it's nice to be able to see each other. So let's see, someone else had a question. How is psychological safety promoted while working virtually, where the agencies are still struggling to be connected. So one thing is that there's this picture of an iceberg. Sometimes when you can't see what's going on in somebody's work environment, it's easy just to focus on results, right? How come you're not getting the job done? Psychological leaders who promote psychological safety have to get under the iceberg. You need to make that, when everything's changed in the last 2 weeks, we need to ask the questions to make sure that people have what they need to build a function, right? So I think it is about connection, it's about empathy, it's about compassion first, to understand what's blocking, what's coming in the way, what do you need for you to be successful, given that you can't come into your usual place of work, right? And then one can get to, okay, so let's talk about, now that you have those, or we've made accommodations, what can we talk about from an accountability point of view? So what I'm going to do is, I think I don't want this to be a, obviously I have ideas on a lot of things, and I can talk a lot, but I do want you now to have the opportunity again to share a little bit from in a smaller group setting. What are the challenges you're facing around psychological safety, and what are some things that you could do, whether as a positional team leader or as a team member? So sorry, I know there are questions coming in, but I won't take all of them now, because I do think, and it's interesting, part of psychological safety is that we all have a lot of knowledge and wisdom, right? And it shouldn't be one person giving all the answers. So I do want to now encourage you to have a different setting where you can talk about this concept. So I'm going to share screen again, so you can just reconnect with that kind of framework. And the question that I'm going to ask is the following: how could you increase psychological safety in your teams? Now, as you discuss this in your teams, you might also talk about some of the problems you're experiencing, and some of your team members might have suggestions. But this is broadly, I would love for each of you to emerge with some action items, some very practical things you could do to increase psychological safety. So I am going to now try to put you into groups again. And if the technology allows me, breakout rooms, and I'm going to just recreate all rooms. Yes, and I'm going to open all rooms. Back on my screen, I might even take a screenshot to see. Let me see, I'll do a screenshot. It's fun to see how many people are there. Give it maybe 10 more seconds. Okay, so again, maybe in this case, I'll try something else. Maybe I'll do a fist to 5. So just give me a visual. 5 meant you had a pretty good discussion about psychological safety. 3 is like medium. 1 is like, yeah, no, not so good. People in my chat room were falling asleep. So give me a score. 5, excellent. All right, I see some hands up. Yeah, okay, I just did a mean of 4.26. That's good. I was an industrial engineer as an undergrad, so I'm very good with mental math. No, actually, as an undergrad, I studied industrial engineering, and I took a course, this was now 20 plus years ago, in organizational psychology, that really got me interested into all of this, first exposed to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So fantastic. I know I had a chance to check the chat box while you were in your rooms, but I would say if to say, if there's one concept that I would like to point to that is, I think, at the heart of creating psychological safety, is the ability to be vulnerable, right? Sometimes we come to work with the work face, even with our colleagues, we don't want to admit, oh, I was up all night because my baby was crying, because then they're going to think, oh, I'm not going to be as effective. Or you don't want to share your highs or lows, you just want to be a robot. And that, I maybe there was a century for which that worked, when we were in a factory putting on things, and productivity was all that mattered. But in this knowledge economy, the ability to be ourselves and be vulnerable creates connection, creates trust. And I would say think about how you are showing up and being vulnerable, and allowing, therefore infecting others on your team with that vulnerability, right? And maybe just to confess, I am, and certainly was less now, super nervous about this session with so many people. And I'm like, yeah. So you know, I had a quick rehearsal with my team, and I was just not myself. I was so nervous. I told them I'm feeling nervous. So yeah, we all have these emotions, and the more we hide them, the more we don't create space for people to be psychologically safe. So I want to now go back to you know, some best practices. So we've talked about PERMA as our understanding of the 5 pillars of well-being. We've talked about psychological safety and how important it is, especially in times of like these, to dig and understand what's going on in your team and how do we create conditions for psychological safety and accountability. And then the last thing I want to share is just some best practices. So like you, probably I've been reading a lot that's been coming out on how do we do this when we're working virtually. And I picked out a couple of frameworks that really stood out to me, and I want to share those with you. So one is this was published in a Harvard Business Review working paper. So it's not yet published because it's reacting to the situation of the epidemic. And it's 7 leadership principles for managing in times of coronavirus. And I'll go through each one of them briefly. And I'll share with you, when we share the presentation with you, I'll share with you the link to the article. But we need to be calm, right? Our brains don't function well when we're not able to kind of embrace that calm approach. As leaders, we also need to gain the confidence of our team that we have a plan, and part of that is just communication, over communication. It's a changing landscape every day. And so our ability to be in close communication with our team is important. Collaboration, I don't think any leader has all the answers at this point, right? And so not only the collaboration of our team, but also collaborating with, with outside people. I've been talking myself to people who are in similar learning and development kind of field as myself. How is their company acting? We had at the center a number of our face-to-face classes canceled. And so just this transition to online, so collaboration within and outside, creativity, right? New business models, new ways of doing things when it's not business as usual. And compassion, I think we've talked about quite a bit in the psychological safety piece, relationships, compassion. And then, you know, strategically cash. When there is a cash crunch, a lot of companies, their usual sources of revenues are going down. And so being very cognizant of the cash situation, because paying salaries is obviously becomes critical. Notice that this framework, the 7 C's, they all start with C's, but feel free to, I mean, I would think about this as a bit of a checklist if you are leading a team. You know, are you doing all of these, or maybe there's another C for you that works better? But I thought that for me, as I looked at this kind of framework, I thought this was robust. It comes from the dean of a business school and was published in the recent HBR. So that's on a team level, especially if you're in a leadership role. The other framework that I wanted to share with you, some best practices. This is very practical. Again, so much is being written on this. So I integrated from a couple of different sources, but the main source for this was Impact International. Is when you're working from home, is really setting the scene so you can have a home working environment versus completely blending the two, right? And again, this is, each of you are individuals and might have different practices. So I do want to, after this, just give you another couple of minutes to share some things that really work with you, for you. Maintaining regular hours, scheduling breaks, including it talks specifically about a lunch break, you know, versus just doing a working lunch. setting ground rules with people in your space. So the reason I'm taking this webinar from outside, this is not my usual space, but with my wife working from home and my kids too, this has become my space, and we have some agreements, should I say, around that in my house. And then ending your day with a routine, otherwise the day doesn't end, and planning something either energizing or fun. Or so these are a few best practices. Now I know each of you probably has a maybe adopted some of these or all of these, but may have some others. So first, let me do a quick check-in to the text box, and before I'll give you a last opportunity to kind of okay, let me check the text box. Okay, so I see. So we extended regular hours to 12 hours so the team members can cater to home as families. I see. Yes. So different, you know, why don't we do this? Just because there's not a whole lot of time left, maybe we can have a whole group chat. What I'm going to ask you here in your chat box, one best practice that you have experienced or seen or heard of or trying around making this work for you where you're working from home. So it'll come up in the chat box, and let's take, I'm going to give 2-3 minutes for this so we can both enter one and read what other people are saying. That's a fantastic list. So thanks everyone. I feel like so there were some that came up quite often. One or two that I noticed was just, you know, the gratitude. Like all of this, we're surrounded by the negative news, the negative consequences, but how do we still appreciate all that is going well? And we always have something to be grateful for, right? And so building in gratitude and other positive emotions into your day, whether it's exercise or so lots of great ways to stay positive. And then I think the other one that really stood out for me is we actually, even though we think we want to do what we want when we want, no structure, we're creatures that like routine. Routine gives us some stability, and so setting up a routine that works for you makes it much easier to get through the day versus having to decide, okay, so now should I do this, or should I do some work, or should I? So there's a lot of research around the power of habits and routines, except that our usual habits have been broken suddenly. So what new habits and routines do you want to set up and perhaps commit to, and how do you get that accountability either with your team or family members? So again, very I'm personally very grateful to have had this opportunity to do what I love to do, which is bring people together to talk about things that are important to them and all of us. And it's we're all learning in this together. I wanted to share this quote, which you know, Thomas Friedman, he's the foreign correspondent for the New York Times. He says what every employer is looking for is not someone who can do the job, but someone who can reinvent the job. So to a certain extent, yeah, you know, we're living in times where it's not going to be business as usual. So also, as you're doing the things you used to do, what needs to be done that's different or new? And this is actually something, depending on where you are in your organization, there's no boss who at this time would not benefit from hearing an innovative, creative suggestion given the changes that are happening. So I'd say challenge yourself also as you try to adjust to all these changes. What can you do even better and different for your organization and for your team? In fact, today, the Secretary General of the United Nations said that, you know, this epidemic, we need to get out of this better than we were entering on all levels, on the fact that, you know, who was worse, who is being affected worse are some of the more vulnerable populations. The fact that we didn't have some of the coordinated systems, that we have shortages in these areas. But I think we also will emerge better on our understanding of well-being and on our need to be able to prioritize that at the workplace. There is no reason that we should think about work as something that somehow takes us away from well-being. On the contrary, so we're forced to think about this more deeply now that we're isolated, but I sincerely believe that we'll emerge in a better place. So, just wanted to thank all of you for taking precious time. That's all we have, our presence, our time. And, if you appreciated this process, this is what we do. We'll follow up with you, and we would be happy to be in touch in any ways. But my deep gratitude for your taking time to connect and share.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop the screen share so we can actually see each other. And yeah, so many familiar and new faces too. And please feel free to follow up with, we'll send you a message. If there's some things that can be followed up, we will be happy to do. And once again, thank you very much for joining today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.
Be safe.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Mohit.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank you so much.